I have a lot more freedom and flexibility in what I think I'm going to be using in 10 years or later. I'm willing to take more risks there. And I don't think that bucket of time with relation to money is something I totally appreciated either. I thought it was just this whole portfolio I had to worry about and grow together. But when you realize that I don't really need this portion for 10 years, that opens up your aperture to risks that you can take. And honestly, as we all know, you'll make some mistakes, but generally speaking, asymmetric risk is going to be the things that return the portfolios.
Welcome to Knowing Me, Knowing You, the podcast for the future of wealth management. Thanks for being here. I'm Marla Sofer. Money is a tool. It empowers people. Let's dive into how technology is personalizing advice, strengthening connections, and creating lasting impact. If you're an advisor looking to differentiate, a fintech leader shaping the next wave, or a client ready to take control of your financial future, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome to Knowing Me, Knowing You. Today, we are joined by Sriram Gollapalli, the co-founder and managing director of Long Angle, a private community for high net worth entrepreneurs, investors, and professionals navigating the complex world of wealth, investing, and life after an exit, and building community with each other. Before founding Long Angle, Sriram was co-founder and scaled iLab Solutions, a B2B SaaS company later acquired by Agilent Technologies. Now he's a thoughtful investor and connector. He spends his time building a purpose-driven platform that emphasizes confidentiality, trusted peer learning, and meaningful access to private markets. We're going to explore his journey from operator to advisor, investor, his perspectives on building financial community and personal purpose, and what lies ahead in the evolving private wealth ecosystem. Sriram, thank you for being here on the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'll forget, there's one more title that I feel like we should add there. It's father of 3 young children. That is probably my biggest day job of all. But looking forward to
this. And the most important, undoubtedly, father, partner. From what I have learned about you in the past, and we would love to bring more into this podcast, really good, loyal friend. You know, I definitely learned that about you. And it just it really struck a chord that, your co-founder was a longtime partner and friend that you stayed in touch with and launched several companies together. So I think you should add that to your title as well.
Yes, we'll do. 30 years. Yeah. I've known him since freshman year of high school. Doesn't always work, but it's worked out, knock on wood, to date for the last 30 years. Looking forward to the next 30 as well.
We always start our podcast asking you what excites you the most about the moment we're in now, about the future of wealth.
That's a great question, Marla. I think what's fascinating today is there's so many opportunities to make decisions at your fingertips that you were typically forced to rely on a third party for. And I think that almost responsibility, I'd say, for most wealth creators, frankly, is actually, I think, underrealized and underappreciated, in my opinion. And I think it's fascinating that the kinds of tools and education that you can get from your fingertips, and then being able to leverage your community, leverage your advisors, leverage your peers, and understanding what makes sense for you. But you can come in a lot more equipped today in these conversations if you spend a little bit of time versus before, where you really were reliant on the person on the other end of the phone or across the desk from you. And I think that's going to be sort of a game changing. I think the other thing I would say is that, especially with the younger wealth demographic coming up through a variety of the different, whether it's tech or family businesses passing through and so on, is the ability to talk about money. I think this is something that is a generational shift, in my opinion, where it was very taboo. It's one of those things that you don't talk about money, sex, and politics. Well, if you can't talk about some of these things, it's a part of our identities, whether you like it or not. It's an attribute anyway. And I think more and more people are realizing there are ways to have these discussions in a manner that is very authentic and trying to just have curious questions. Like this is a large part of your life. This is a large part of what Western society ingratiates you to build effectively. So more and more people are comfortable talking about it if they can get the right people to talk about it with.
So much I want to dive into. Number one, I totally agree with that last point, where that ability to talk about money, it's not only that it is kind of opening up new opportunities. It's empowering. The more we talk about money, the more you learn about other people, and you improve your own financial decisions. You have more, exactly to your point. When we were typically served by third parties, you had one source of information feeding you what you should be doing. And when you democratize and expand that access and knowledge base, you just enrich all of that input that helps you make the right decision, including what mistakes did people make? What,
100%.
Yeah, like that's a huge learning, oh, you did that. That's something I could steer clear of. It's really, really empowering.
I think the other part that comes too, Marla, is the unknown unknowns. I think because there's no guidebook, there's typically, I'm seeing this more actually now with classes, like personal finance classes are becoming, I think there was one high school actually, a public high school in the area that said personal finance is a graduation requirement. I applaud that. I think it comes naturally to some people. It comes unnaturally to many people. And, no one says you graduate college, you get your jobs. No one says this is what you should do. Did someone tell you simple things like maximizing a 401k for matching? It's what does that even mean? You just rely on your HR guides to do that. To more complex things when you're older and fortunate to have some more money. No one tells you about, should you superfund the 529 and why? Or how do you think about spending on travel? Should I pay for economy or should I pay for business? What do other people do? Because a lot of it comes down to, what are my friends doing? How do you opt? And I think everyone typically, as you grow in your wealth journey, am I doing this right? I hear that so often. I'm not doing this right. And honestly, whatever you're doing is probably right or it's probably wrong. But the point is getting to learn how other people approach it is pretty fascinating, because you don't really reveal those layers of many people, let alone neighbors, friends, family members. It's a fairly solo journey that, if you think about it for a moment, that you're put upon without too many guides to take you there.
I absolutely love what you've built and everything, your philosophy behind it. It is a very solo journey and outrageously overwhelming. Everyone is trying to sell you something. And the more capital you accumulate, the more aggressive that overwhelm and that sales becomes. Everyone's trying to get you to do something with your money. So you, Sriram, are the epitome of what most wealth managers are looking for. You've had a good exit. You're an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur. You've done a lot of things. You have this incredible future ahead of you. You have an incredible past behind you. You are active in private markets. Talk to us a little bit about what you have learned kind of in your own founder journey, and what you went through, and all of the emotional and strategic shifts as you thought about an exit event, a liquidity event. That is so critical to a lot of people in the wealth industry. They want to understand what was going through your head, and who did you want to hear from? Did you want to talk to founders? Were you interested in talking to professionals? Were you interested in avoiding professionals at all costs and just talking to other people who've been there? What was that like?
It's a lot there, Marla. Okay, well, let's see. Let me see if I can unpack parts of that here. So we'll start with the quick arc. I started I live in the DC area. I started my career in consulting, traditional consulting, Big Four. Then moved up to Boston and started a B2B SaaS company. We bootstrapped it from the beginning. And that was probably the first real, wealth pivot, in lack of better words, where I went from making high 5, low 6 figures at consulting to burning or needing to burn about having $10,000 of savings last for almost a year, honestly. I went to paying whatever the rent was before that to, I remember the rent after that, which is $400 a month in a house with 6 guys, 2 of which were my co-founders rather. So I think being responsible, learning a little bit more about just general fiscal responsibility, not that I wasn't because I'd been able to save, but just being mindful of that. And also I think this happens a lot, struggling with how, again, with the kid side of things, but being comfortable in that journey, right? I think being able to live however, whenever, tomorrow, I wouldn't love it, but I don't, if I had to do it again, I wouldn't mind it. So I think having that mindset from that perspective, I think was really important. We went through the journey. We were fortunate to make it out to the other side, where we've had some ups and downs. I think the biggest downs, I would say, through that whole journey, growing the business, was missing payroll. So we made sure in the 10 years that we ran it, we never missed employee payroll, but we missed our payroll. I can't tell you how many times. And it was eventually paid, but it was semi-stressful from the perspective of, but we wanted to make sure that our employees were taken care of. We wanted to make sure that they weren't worried about. It's not like we could survive too long without pay, but we had a little bit more flexibility from one perspective, but it wasn't a tried and true, like, this money's coming every month. We went through the exit. That's a whole different story on its own. When you kind of have that balance literally hit the checking account or savings account or wherever it goes, that moment is pretty unreal. And I wish that upon many people. It's sort of, in our case, it worked out to be about, like, call it a decade's worth of work at once. So, we were fortunate to kind of go through an event like that. And you're right. However it works, people find out. You don't know how much these things are. It could be hundreds of dollars, millions of dollars. You don't really know where the exits end up. But people find out that some event happened and they make some assumptions. And I will say, I was definitely, and I still to some degree am, not as much as I was then, skeptical of more the professionals coming to me. And the main reason for that, not that I don't respect them, not that I don't know as much or anything like that, more that I knew that there was, generally speaking, an angle that they had, which they are also employees. They're, generally speaking, this is their job. So there is some inclination and incentive for me to work with them. And depending on the fee structures, which we can talk about separately, it can be very expensive to you as a customer, I guess, for what I would argue sometimes is just peace of mind. We interviewed several. I was skeptical of several, and I really was fortunate to have a peer group of friends, both through who I just went the exit with.
You're self-directed entirely. You didn't choose any.
I effectively never did. We can talk about that for a moment, but I never went through a professional advisor. I did a lot of self-directed. I still self-direct pretty much. Today, I self-direct everything. There was a period where I kind of didn't use an advisor, but gave some to a more managed service, a little bit to a managed service. And it was a unique experience, which the value wasn't there for paying the 79 points for that specific instance. But being able to talk to other people who I knew, that's the other thing too. Like, I didn't know, I wanted to equip myself. I wanted to learn a little bit more about how people approach this and some of the traditional advice you hear, like 60-40, like that's a very traditional portfolio split. I started going down that route because, like, well, this must be safe because, like, everyone talks about this. Bonds aren't really for everybody. Like, I lost a fair bit of money in bonds in 16, 17, and 18. And today I have a very minimal to no bond position, which is more of a personal choice. But it's not one size fits all, I think, for starters. And I think you should equip yourself. You should learn a little bit more about before entertaining working with someone.
There was quite a lot there and a lot of insights for everyone who goes through this experience. What you have proven to be phenomenal at is building community. And so I'm really curious if you could talk a little bit about your model. No ads, no pitches. It is purely peer-driven dialogue. One question I want you to add in is, what was missing in the high net worth space that you wanted to fix? And it sounds like your own experience led you to also want to fix it.
100%. What we were looking for is really what we were fortunate to have with a couple friends. Really what the seeds of this really were. My high school friend and I, Tad, we had gone through this journey together. We went through the exit together. And we said, hey, it'd be great to you and I talk to each other for the last 30 years. We have a general sense of how each person's doing. It'd be great to bring a few more friends into the mix, and no judgment on the friends, but we just want to make sure they have a few million dollars that they're kind of working with and how they're approaching all the things that come with that, whether it's life, whether it's how do you think about giving money to their children? How do you think about allocation strategies, all the things, right? How do you think about travel? What do you spend on? What do you splurge on? So we said, how do you do that without alienating people? Because, it's merely an attribute. It's not, again, to be very clear, it's not a judgment about where people end up on this wealth spectrum. It's merely an attribute of one's career, journey, luck, a number of things will get you. So we said, let's create a safe space for a dozen friends we're fortunate to know, across a variety of industries, and say, hey, we just want to verify that, would you be interested in having a safe space to have these conversations? We felt we were missing it because, honestly, many of the conversations we were having with, let's say, professionals, let's use a professionals, lowercase professionals, there was always some incentive for the other person to have the conversation with me. They could be the most authentic, they could be the most genuine person trying to work with me, having my best intentions at heart. And there are many of them. I'd say most of the industry is like that. So, to be clear, with that in mind, though, there's still some money transaction for that conversation that will yield in that person's favor from my checking account effectively, or savings account, or whatever it might be, which is not to say it's a bad thing, but it does sort of flavor the relationship or the conversation versus talking to your friends at a dinner party that, there's really no incentive for them to be steering you one way or the other more or less. So that was what I say is was missing. And then what we said is, let's kind of build a safe space so that we know that it's people that are interested. So that's the other thing too. Not everyone's actually interested in talking about it, for better or for worse. And we know that you have at least a little bit of money behind your name, and let's prove it. And let's have a conversation across industries. I think diversity is actually one of the most important things. I'm fortunate to be more in the tech world, and it's a bubble, like as any bubbles are, but you're in bubble in the sense of the conversations are very echo chambery. Like we might be in an AI bubble. That's a whole different new podcast, another day, Marla. But when you're kind of in an echo chamber, you're not getting different perspectives. So when you hear about people that have 90% real estate with an 80% lever versus 100% equities with no debt, that's fascinating, because you're like, how did you get those choices? Was it a nature of how you get there? Or was it a perspective of you made rational or intentional choices to do things?
So it's diversity in the people you're listening to, diversity in the allocations, diversity in the journey that got you to have this couple of million that you're really looking to pull out from, right? That's kind of that's what makes 100%. Long Angle special. So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
And I didn't prep you for this one, and I don't know the answer. I'm always talking to people in the wealth space, and I've referred multiple to Long Angle. Is there an openness to bringing industry professionals from wealth into Long Angle? Is there a very specific aversion to it? Are you trying to avoid bringing wealth managers into the community?
The short answer is no, and we have several. Okay. And I think if I could have my cake and eat it too, Marla, the ideal wealth manager that are in the community, and many of them actually do behave like this, is either wealth managers that have kind of completed their book of business, where they're just comfortable with where they are from a book of business perspective, and they're not trying to grow whatever it might be, and they're here to really share experiences, knowledge. And I'm not going to lie, these are hard people to find for all the reasons you can imagine.
Or they're of a certain demographic, and because they're in that demographic, they may not be as innovative. They might not be looking for, well, how can I actually improve my business because I'm coasting it out right now.
Sure. Yeah, that's true too. But at the same time, I don't want to underestimate the generations of knowledge that exist in some of these professions. Many RIAs are family businesses. Many are, very, very intelligent people working on helping people through things. I personally, if I were to go down a path, it would be a fee-only approach where it basically kind of is there as a backstop to help make decisions. We have some of that in Long Angle just as a community built accountability, but people that have a little bit more experience, it's helpful, right? How do you kind of less the Monte Carlo simulations, which are sort of interesting, but how do you approach portfolio construction, and how much drawdown can you really be comfortable with is something that I've been talking about with people. And the other thing I'll mention more broadly speaking, Marla, is that the last 15 years have been an unusual, particularly unusual U.S. equities market.
For sure.
And I think
the whole
that
generation doesn't know what down looks like.
No, it's high, and you got a little bit in 08, you're a little bit in 21-ish, but it's unreal and so it's also, I think it's really important for people to understand that mean reversion theory is something that I taught a lot about, but also there's a world out there. Like, it's not up to the right all the time. Yes, 2 years more than one, but it's something just to be aware, like markets are markets for a reason. And I think that's something else that you'll get from having more professionals discussions if they can really be thoughtful about not trying to build a book of business so intentionally.
Really interesting. And I'm sorry, I didn't prepare you for the question and I didn't know where it was going to go, but I think it's really interesting that you share. Here is like, yes, you do want to hear from wealth managers, and here are those voices that are welcome because you've kind of avoided, or as much as you can within your control, avoided the incentive and the conflict of interest that, is kind of allowing your very prized, precious community to be hunting ground.
I will say, if there's anything that we will clamp down on, it is solicitation free. There is zero tolerance for solicitation of any kind, as you've seen. And we've been fortunate. We interview everybody. We go through the process on purpose. It's not just open sign up. We do the wealth verification. So it's already fairly gated. It's free, as you alluded to earlier, to really create that sense of community. And everyone could afford it, but bringing all walks of life into it. And we've been fortunate. We've not had to really kick many. We've had to, but not many people.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. That was my question also. How many you've kicked out and why?
Yeah, I would say not many.
But it's always for solicitation. Like solicitation is you've crossed the line.
It's solicitation. I think the other main reason is anyone rather that purports to have some unique edge on tax avoidance. We have very low tolerance for, because yes, there's a lot of interesting tax schemes, but when you're on the gray area of the dirty dozen or anything like that, it just becomes, it's not worth it. Like, in my opinion, it's not worth it. And if that's it's up to you. It's a personal decision.
Exactly.
If you're going to going down at solar credits or whatever it might be, the flavor of the day. But if someone's really pushing it, the other one that we're really thoughtful about is if someone's really pushing life insurance, we're pretty much, there's a very, very small sliver of the population that part of that product is good for. If they think it's the best thing since sliced bread, we're pretty not sure that it's always framed. And this is actually true. It's not you, it's us. Like, this is just not the right place for, what you're intending on.
What if financial planning wasn't just about numbers, but about you, your values, your goals, your vision for the future? Nomi is transforming client discovery for wealth managers, going beyond assets and risk scores to uncover what truly matters. With behavioral insights and real-time data, Nomi helps advisors personalize advice, build deeper connections, and grow their businesses. Because the best financial decisions start with knowing you. Discover the future of client engagement at nomi.com. Right. And in any of those, like if you're pushing and don't recognize the importance of personal context and, having like the depth. Anyway, I completely get it and understand. You as a founder, investor, community builder, I'm sure have had several shifts in your perspective, in your personal life around risk, returns, the role of capital, your allocation to private markets, your approach to tax optimization. How has that changed in your life? How has your own kind of book aligned to your evolving definition of risk, return, and capital?
No, I really appreciate that. I will say the other thing that happens post exit, if an event like that happens to people, typically speaking, having spoken to hundreds of them now, there's a period of time where you really, I think usually you have a great responsibility and you feel like you have great responsibility, and to some degree you do. But what I mean, that sometimes manifests itself in slightly unhealthy ways where you're actually checking your portfolio sometimes daily, if not weekly, with concerns. I think typically, and this is myself, I can speak from firsthand, concerns that you're doing something wrong with an allocation strategy that you chose or an investment strategy. Because sometimes the allocation strategy is changing rapidly because you think that's the right way to approach it, whether it's day trading, options, puts and calls, or whether it's like, weekly rebalancing. Like, there are a number of things that you're going to feel initially that unfortunately I think many people just go through. I think it takes a very, what's the right word? It takes a very responsible, or it takes a very measured person to really get to where I am today, honestly, which is typically, and you hear this a lot, one of the quotes I quote a lot now is, it's time in market, it's not market timing. And you have to go through that to really realize that that's actually fundamentally true. Like, broadly speaking, save some cataclysmic activity, even through COVID, everything else, markets will go up and to the right. Will they go every day? No. But over at least 30 years, it's 100%. 20-year, almost every 20-year period, it's like mostly that way too. But it's a day-to-day that can be really frustrating, especially depending on how you think about it. So today, I have more to privates. And I'll say the thing with privates, both around just learning about a number of asset classes that where money is to be made. Like today, I think, or yesterday, we have something around music royalties. How do you get an access to a sliver of that? Or oil and gas, or just general private credit, or, a number of different,
we'll call them
all of them, alts. And I think the other thing that's happening these days, especially in the US public market, is that the privates are actually growing at a much larger pace. So if you're buying the S&P and hoping that you have the typical advice was you're buying S&P and you're having a typical US market exposure, that's actually untrue as well. Because look, all these companies are staying private for much longer than ever before, with valuations that no one's even heard of before on the private side. So you're actually missing parts of the US economy that typically an index would protect you from in theory, right? But in practice, it's not. The other thing about privates that I've learned to come that it actually helps someone who's not a day trader is that most of them are illiquid. And I say that in a positive note because you're actually like stuck in most cases and you're paying for an illiquidity premium, but at the same time, it's now you've allocated it and you can't even be tempted. I mean, very rarely, but you can be tempted, but you can't act on any sort of liquidity event to pull it out. So that comes sort of the last point around what I've learned a lot more about is when you think about how you approach allocation, just generally speaking, is around time horizons, right? So I have a lot more freedom and flexibility in what I think I'm going to be using in 10 years or later. I'm willing to take more risks there. And I don't think that bucket of time with relation to money is something I totally appreciated either. I thought it was just this whole portfolio I had to worry about and grow together. But when you realize that I don't really need this portion for 10 years, that opens up your aperture to risks that you can take. And honestly, as we all know, you'll make some mistakes, but generally speaking, asymmetric risk is going to be the things that return the portfolios.
So I want to use this as a catalyst to ask the next question. I know long angle, maybe because it's community driven, because you have people coming from so many diverse backgrounds. And I know you've actually posted in there and sparked questions about purpose and about aligning the money to what is it for? And so as you think about what you just talked about, time horizons, risk, capital allocations, and you ask a totally different question, and it's much more aligned with Know Me, obviously, and what we talk about on this podcast and what I've kind of built with my startup. How do you kind of embed purpose and what a meaningful life looks like for you today? And how do you encourage the community to really think about meaning, legacy, personal growth, and purpose?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I'd say that's something else that most people don't allow themselves to do. And I would also preface that wealth is an attribute, but should not be the catalyst to have that conversation about purpose at all. Like, it helps, and we'll explain why. But I would say everyone should have the conversation, especially today with the kinds of tools that are out there, that we're not really sure what the job situation or job market's going to be looking like in let alone 10 years in terms of what your typical white collar knowledge worker is going to be doing. I think purpose becomes strikingly more important. Having said that, I think the journey of intention is really important. And I think it's very foreign, honestly, to most, at least Western society, in my opinion, and this is Sriram's opinion, because you're effectively taught or ingrained in a society that I go to school, I go to college, I might go to grad school, I might go to work, or I'll go to work, might go to grad school again, I'm going to go work and then I'm going to retire, right? And really, the thing that you're typically looking at is, by and large, like what's my savings rate? What's my bank account? What's the retirement account looking like? And what have I accumulated from a wealth perspective, whether it's through homes and other stuff? I'm grossly generalizing it, but typically that's almost the thermometer that people are using for success in terms of measuring success, honestly.
Even self-attributed definitions, right, of success.
Yeah, 100%. Because and honestly, other than, which I'm now learning more about, other than health, and you could argue maybe it's BMI or maybe something else like that. If especially many people are type A, or they're looking for something to optimize, it's easy to see like a bank account number go up, or it's easy to see to some degree the BMI get down, or whatever the goals are there. But barring those two things, it's how do you measure success of your time, right? You're measuring success of time based on wealth growing and you're staying healthy and you have more time to live to some degree. That's interesting. But then when you get to a moment around, or when you can get more the maturity around, well, maybe the money is not actually as important because I've hit certain numbers, or I've constructed a life where the number is not as important. And that's actually a whole different discussion as well. Then it gets into intentionality of living. And what are the moments that you are passionate about? And then there's also, like we do, and I think you've done this too, we talked about this before, around the things like a centenarian exercise. How would you look back? I mean, these seems like very trite examples or trite exercises to do, but unless you actually sit down and do them, you don't really realize, I mean, this gets into like how many weeks we have to live and things like that. Yeah. Or die with zero, but die with zero. And then also there's another one, the weeks you have to live. I think we'll have to look that one up. And I think any decisions you make are fine, obviously, but the intentionality, I think, is what I've kind of gotten more aligned with. And that when it comes to the wealth side, I think allowing yourself to spend in some cases, I think, is something that is hard, especially for a first generation wealth creator, because you're taught to save to build that wealth number, not really appreciating that it's okay to spend in certain, I mean, again, it's all relative, but spending on a trip, or spending on dinners, or spending on health, or, and these can add up quickly and they can spiral out of control. There's no question about that. But I think the mass majority of the population that have accumulated wealth don't really necessarily have the tools to think about how to spend with intentionality to feel like you're doing okay, because there's always this concern in your mind, like, am I spending too much on that thing that I would never spend on? I would never spend on having a cook. We don't do this today, but I would never spend this on a cook, like to help with our meal prep for once a month, or I would never go on a spa retreat for myself because that's way too expensive and it seems too indulgence. Yeah. And I think I'm not there yet either fully, but I think I'm just having the aperture of learning, because the other thing I'll say, the flip side is, especially as your portfolio grows, you'll see blips of as much as people shouldn't be checking daily portfolio shifts, when you do, those portfolio shift numbers are sometimes 4, 5, or even 6 figures in a day. So that also puts things in perspective when you're making $1,000 decision. It's like, well, I got a lot of impact today. Did it make that difference for me? And again, it's a slippery slope, but I think the intentionality of that decision-making process can actually be very eye-opening and liberating from one perspective, as long as you don't go fully off the deep end and start writing bigger and bigger checks. Yeah.
Oh gosh. I bet that resonates to so many people, especially over the last couple of years, where it's like, gosh, I just broke my head over this $1,000, experience or whatever it might be, dinner. And my one stock made that much, in a couple of hours. So I think that will also change a lot, to your point. And there's a lot of financial planners that listen to this that are very focused on behavioral science, where they feel like a lot of their job is teaching their client to spend, teaching their client to actually embrace a new behavior that feels extremely uncomfortable for them, because time is limited. We're all kind of here for this very limited amount of time. And again, to your point, it actually made me think of, I often also, we talk a lot about the alignment between money and wellness and your own health and well-being. And a yoga teacher I follow basically said, if you're more flexible, it doesn't mean you're more happy. And I love that analogy to the BMI. And he made the example to the ballerinas in Black Swan. And he was like, those are not happy ballerinas and they're extremely flexible. So I love that analogy to kind of, when you're thinking about wellness and well-being and making the most of your time on this planet, it is way more than tracking a number. And it is way more than tracking whether that's your BMI or your money in your bank account, your savings, your portfolio. So a lot of what you said really resonated there. I want to ask one more question before we start to wrap up. And in Long Angle, you just have exposure to what is on the top of your community's minds all day. And so would you mind sharing, what are some conversations or bits of information that have surprised you? And what are some that come up again and again and again as it relates to their wealth?
Yeah, I think purpose comes up a lot. I'd say it's a popular topic around what is it purpose and what is enough, I think tend to spark some interesting conversations, because there aren't very many places to go to have that authentically and how you approach that. I think the other theme that comes up with frequency is the next generation, whether it's how to give to the children, when to give to the children, how much to give to the children. So there's a whole giving, or the whole estate planning side practically. There's the practical side of setting up the right slats and so on, but specifically when should I give them what? And we could have a whole different podcast on how you approach that, as well as the actual raising of them. Most of the community members are first-gen wealth creators. So there was just a different sense of struggle or wanting to I guess, versus the next generation is typically living in a very different circumstance than how this first generation grew up. So how do you think about raising kids in this environment, and how do you make sure that they're as happy as they can be or want to be, and so on? I think then there's also just a straight up asset allocation strategies and not even negotiations, but how are you approaching paying for service providers? How much are you paying? We just had a discussion today, I think, about pledged asset lines. And someone asked, I didn't know you could negotiate this against your equity portfolio for 1 point over SOFR versus 2 points that I'm getting. And all these things matter, but I think partially I think the biggest thing I'll say around sort of the wealth journey is what I usually call the zip code effect, effectively, where, my lawn care in where I live costs, call it $45 a cut, but the same lawnmower, the same equipment, the same, gardening staff are charging $30 for the lawn, 3 miles up the road. And I think that's the challenge, I think, the fundamental challenge with the wealth journey, because pricing on the service providers can be generally opaque. A lot of people come here to figure out, am I doing this wrong? I want to work with this person, but it doesn't feel right, or I feel like I'm paying too much. They just don't want to have a bad deal, right? You work so hard for this. It's like, I don't mind paying. I just want to make sure I'm paying fairly, or I'm paying whatever is appropriate.
And even after I'm bought into the value
I'm bought into the value. I love the person, whatever it is. But then you find out that there's like this zip code pricing, I'm calling, whatever you want to call it. And I think that is very frustrating. So that conversation comes up. And then I think there's a number of conversations about even the kinds of things people spend on. And it's fun because it's the small things, but it's the large things. It's like, getting help when you get off an airport in some countries is not very expensive, but the experience is far better. Like having someone pick you up at the plane side, I've learned now, which I never knew before, is like hundreds of dollars in some of the more exotic locations. And the experience is far better getting you through customs or whatever it might be. I would never do that in the US. For sure. I don't even know how to do it here, but I would consider it in some destinations for travel, as well as spending on help. Or how do you think about, how do people spend intentionally? And I think that it's fun to see from a community's perspective, because that's not a window that you get to see into many people's lives.
That's so fascinating. We always end our podcast with what is one instance in your life or a conversation you've had that totally changed your relationship with money?
Yeah. I would say the conversation was typically, and the experience was what I alluded to a little bit. It was really around one asset allocation is not for everybody. And I think you're sort of loosely taught and you're ingested with 60-40 portfolio is for everybody. That's it. And
or a series of, honestly, what most are selling today is your 1 out of 5 allocations between conservative and aggressive.
Yeah. And that's just not true. And I think, and the conversation I had with peers, especially around those things, is if you don't equip yourself, I think the other thing I'll say, mistakes that you can make have costly impact over time. So it's so important in the early years of the journey to equip yourself enough that you feel comfortable and you have a general idea of the choices that you're making and the impacts they have. If you go in fully ignorant and or you're fully trusting another individual, it could be fine, but it could also, you could not realize that there's this underlying fee drag that will cost you $250,000 over a 25-year lifetime that maybe you're okay with, but at least you know it. I think the conversation is really broadly around taking agency here, equipping yourself a little bit more than just asserting and trusting fully. And again, this is not to say that people out to get you, but it's more just being thoughtful. You worked really hard typically for getting to where this got you. And how do you put it in a situation where you're comfortable going forward?
Couldn't have said it better myself. So it is all about agency and then holding yourself you're accountable to the type of future that you want. The agency creates the ability to hold the reins and create that framework of accountability that you're looking for. Sriram, this has been phenomenal. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your journey, your experiences with wealth, from being a founder to an investor to a community builder. Your insights have been fantastic around peer-driven learning, around perceived conflicts of interest. You didn't say that. You said incentive models, but I'll say perceived conflicts of interest. Wealth beyond the spreadsheet, designing a life of purpose, how important listening to others who are going through something similar in a similar experience in life. We won't say age, stage, or zip code because you are diversifying beyond that. How can people learn more about you, Long Angle, get involved if they'd like, become a part of the community?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And thank you so much for your time. It flew by. I didn't even know how all this time flew by. Yeah, look up longangle.com. It's free community. We just go through a short 20-minute interview, and we just make sure you have at least $2.2 million. We do meetups and in most regional locations around the world now, and we do 2 to 3 virtual events per week on a number of these topics. I've been writing a lot more on LinkedIn recently. I'm trying to figure out this whole LinkedIn game. So love to hear from people. You can follow me, DM me. I try to reach everybody whenever someone asks me a question. And if you're ever in the DMV area, hit me up. I'm happy to always grab a coffee with someone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. For full disclosure to all of our listeners, I joined Long Angle as a referral from an acquaintance, not a close friend, quite some time ago. And I was impressed from the very first day. I just thought it was a phenomenal community, really loved the tone and the tenor that you have really established and cultivated and maintained as it has grown to how many members now?
Yeah, just under 7,000.
That's phenomenal. Listeners, as you are thinking about building wealth with purpose and you are craving community in your life, in your financial decisions, please reach out to Sriram, learn more about the free Long Angle community. If you appreciated this conversation, please like it, rate it, share it with your friends. If you're a wealth manager who listened to this and were really inspired or maybe thought differently about what your founders that are approaching liquidity events and what's going on in their minds, if that changed something, share it with your other wealth manager friends, with the rest of your team. Let's keep this conversation going. And thank you for joining us today on Knowing Me, Knowing You.
Thank you so much, Marla. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on the Knowing Me, Knowing You podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more transformative conversations to you. Until next time, keep discovering, keep growing, and remember, you're in control of your own financial story. Follow us for more conversations on financial confidence, self-discovery, and the future of money.